Today in Capechi's Corner, we're going to look at proportions. We are first going to look at the cross product property of proportions. We call this cross multiplying in math a lot. And what it says is if I have a fraction, AB is equal to C over D. So this is a proportion. I have a fraction on either side. Then AD is equal to BC. This is why we call it cross multiplying. I'm going to take AD, which is the numerator of one fraction times the denominator of the other fraction, and then vice versa, the denominator of that fraction times the numerator of the other fraction, and set them equal to each other. So for instance, when I look at my example, if I'm going to cross multiply, I have 9 times 2 is equal to 3 times y, and the directions ask me to solve, so I have 18 is equal to 3y, divide both sides by 3, and y has a value of 6. Now I can only cross multiply when I have one fraction on either side of the equal sign. Let's look at a few more examples. Again, I have a proportion because I have an equation that states that two ratios are equal. So here's one ratio times the other ratio. I'm going to cross multiply. So I have 7 times 10 gives me 70 is equal to 5 times x, which gives me 5x. I divide both sides by 5, and I have x is equal to 14. Now I can also check my work. Once I know that x is equal to 14, I can substitute it back into my original. So I have 7 over 5 is equal to 14 over 10. And I can check to see if this is equivalent one or two ways. I can cross multiply again, where 7 times 10 gives me 70, and 5 times 4 also gives me 70, so I know 14 is the correct answer. Or I also can just visually take a look. I know 7 over 5. If I were to multiply top and bottom by 2, I get 14 over 10, which is what I have on the right side of that equation. So either way, I know that x is equal to 14 is a correct answer. In number 2, I'm going to cross multiply again. So I have 2c times 10 is equal to 5 times 3. So I get 20c is equal to 15. Divide both sides by 20. So c is equal to 15 over 20. Now before I say that that's my final answer, I need to make sure that's simplified. Both the top and the bottom are divisible by 5, so my final answer there is going to be 3 over 4. In number 3, we'll take 10 times 5, which gets us 50, and then t times 2t. So I'm going to write that out because sometimes that gets tricky. So I have 50 is equal to t times 2t. Remember, we're going to add the exponent. So this gives me 2t squared. Now when I solve, I want to get my variable by itself. So I'm going to divide both sides by 2. So I have 25 is equal to t squared. And I want to take the square root of both sides to get t. When I take the square root of both sides, I need to remember that plus or minus. So my final answer here is plus or minus 5 is the value for t. Now I can check both of them. So if I check positive 5 first, I have 10 over 5 is equal to 2 times 5 over 5. So this is 10 over 5 is equal to 10 over 5. So that's good. Same thing with negative 5. I have 10 over negative 5 is equal to 2 times negative 5 over 5. So on the left-hand side, this gives me negative 2. And on my right-hand side, I get 2 times negative 5, which is negative 10 over 5, which is also negative 2. In number 4, I'm going to take 3 times 4, which gives me 12. And then I have x times x plus 1. So I have 12 is equal to, and x times x gives me x squared. Remember, I'm going to add the exponent. And x times 1 gives me x. Now at this point, my highest power is a 2. So that means I'm going to bring everything to one side and see if I can factor it. So I set it equal to 0. I have x squared plus x minus 12. And remember, I want my leading coefficient, which in this case is 1, to be positive, so I'm all set. So now I need to try to factor it. That's why I brought everything to one side. I have x squared, which gives me x and x. I have a negative here, so my signs are going to be opposite, so I have a plus and a minus. And I'm looking for factors of 12 that when I subtract, I get 1. So it's going to be 4 times 3. So my 4 is my highest factor. I need that to be attached to my plus. So I get a 4 here and a 3 here. So now I've factored it. And again, my directions told me to solve. So I have x plus 4 is equal to 0, or x minus 3 is equal to 0, because I know when I multiply the two of them together, I get 0. So this gives me x is equal to negative 4 and x is equal to positive 3. I check back to my original and I see that my denominator is just x there. So I know I can have a 0 on the bottom. So I know that negative 4 and 3 look okay. Again, I can check my work. So let's do that. So when I check it, let's try negative 4 first. I have 3 over negative 4 is equal to negative 4 plus 1 over 4. And this gives me negative 3 over 4 is equal to negative 4 plus 1 is negative 3 over 4, so I'm good. Let's do the same thing with positive 3. So I have 3 over 3, which is 1, is equal to 3 plus 1 over 4, which is also 1, so I'm all set. So my answers there are x is equal to negative 4 and x is equal to positive 3. Let's take a look at our last problem for today. So again, I'm going to cross multiply. I have negative 5 times a plus 3 is equal to a plus 5 times a minus 3. So my first step on the left-hand side is I'm going to distribute, so I get negative 5a minus 15. On the right-hand side, I have a binomial times a binomial, so I'm going to use FOIL. So it gives me a squared. My outside is negative 3a. My inside is positive 5a. And my last is negative 15. I'll rewrite what I have on the left-hand side because on the right-hand side I need to combine my terms. So I get a squared plus 2a minus 15. So this is where students get stuck a lot. What do I do from here? Now again, my highest power that I have is to the second power. Anytime I have something from the second power or higher, I bring everything to one side and see if I can factor it. So my coefficient, again, my leading coefficient there is positive 1, so I know that's the side I want to go to. So I'm going to add 5a to both sides. I'll add 15 to both sides, and I have 0 is equal to a squared plus 7a. Now what do I do from here? I always look to see if I can get a greatest common factor out. So let me do that first. I notice in both terms that there is an a, so I'm going to factor out an a, and I'm left with a plus 7. Now because of the zero product property, I know if I multiply this times this and get 0, that one of them has to be 0. So either a has to be 0 or a plus 7 has to equal 0. Subtract both sides. So my final answer is a is equal to 0 or a is equal to negative 7.